The entire bar went silent when the biker grabbed the waitress's jacket and accidentally tore the outer fabric during a heated argument. Nobody expected what happened next. Beneath the damaged jacket was something that made the biker's expression change instantly, while the waitress stood frozen, desperately trying to cover herself and keep her composure. The laughter stopped. The music seemed to disappear. Even the people who had been watching from the corners suddenly realized they had been judging someone whose story they knew nothing about. Before we begin, if you believe kindness can give people a second chance, please like this video, share it with someone who needs a little hope, leave a comment, and subscribe to Kindness Corner 2.0. Your support helps these stories reach more people. It was a bright Saturday afternoon when the first customers began filling the small roadside bar called the Copper Lantern. Sunlight poured through the wide front windows, reflecting off polished tables and making the dusty road outside look almost peaceful. The place was known for its burgers, cold drinks, old jukebox, and especially the group of bikers who gathered there every weekend. Among them was a broad-shouldered man named Rylan Mercer, 42 years old, who had earned a reputation for being intimidating without ever needing to raise his voice. He rode an old black motorcycle, wore a faded denim vest, and usually sat at the same corner table with his friends. But underneath his rough appearance was a man carrying years of regret and a quiet determination to protect people who were treated unfairly. Working that afternoon was 26-year-old Alara Voss, a waitress who had become familiar with the difficult rhythm of the place. She moved from table to table with a tired smile, balancing plates while trying not to show how exhausted she really was. Her uniform was simple, her dark hair was tied into a neat ponytail, and a small silver pendant rested beneath her collar. She had taken the job several months earlier after life had forced her to start over. She rarely complained, rarely asked for help, and never told customers about the problems waiting for her after every shift. Alara had learned that people often assumed they knew everything about her simply because she served their food. Some thought she was shy. Others thought she was distant. A few treated her like she was invisible. She accepted all of it because she needed the job. Every paycheck helped keep a roof over her head and supported her younger brother, who was finishing school in another town. Alara had promised herself that no matter how difficult life became, she would keep moving forward. That afternoon, however, something unusual happened. A nervous man entered the bar carrying an old leather folder. He looked around before quietly approaching Alara. She recognized him immediately. His name was Dorian Hale, and he had been asking questions about a missing charity donation connected to the bar's former owner. Alara had discovered the folder behind the kitchen storage shelves earlier that week, but she had not yet found the courage to tell anyone about it. Dorian noticed the folder in her hand and quickly became agitated. He insisted that she give it to him. Alara refused because she knew the documents belonged to the community charity that had helped struggling families in the neighborhood. Rylan watched from across the room. He noticed that Alara wasn't being rude. She was simply frightened. When Dorian stepped closer, Rylan stood up. The room became tense. Several bikers looked toward their friend, expecting trouble. But Rylan did something nobody expected. He told Dorian to step back and let the waitress breathe. Dorian reluctantly moved away, but before leaving, he knocked into Alara's tray. Plates crashed onto the floor. Alara immediately knelt to collect the pieces. Rylan helped her. For a moment, neither said anything. Then Alara quietly thanked him and returned to work. The afternoon continued, but Rylan couldn't stop thinking about what he had seen. Alara had looked less frightened of Dorian than she had of losing her job. That told him more than words could. An hour later, the situation exploded. Dorian returned with two men and demanded the folder. Alara refused again. One of the men reached toward the counter, and Rylan stepped between them. Voices rose. Customers stood up. Alara tried to move toward the kitchen, but in the confusion, someone grabbed at her outer jacket. Rylan reacted quickly, pulling the man's arm away. The jacket caught against a chair and tore loudly down the side. Everyone froze. Ilara immediately stepped backward, clutching the damaged fabric together. Ryland's face changed. He realized that the accident had embarrassed her, and he immediately stepped away to give her space. But when Ilara reached for the jacket, the silver pendant slipped into view. Ryland stared at it. His entire expression went blank. The pendant carried a tiny engraved symbol, a lighthouse surrounded by 3 stars. Ryland knew that symbol. Years earlier, his younger sister had volunteered at a community shelter that used the exact same emblem. She had disappeared from his life after a terrible family dispute, and the last thing she had ever given him was an identical pendant. Ryland asked Ilara where she had gotten it. She hesitated. Then she explained that it had belonged to a woman who had cared for her when she was younger. Ilara had never known much about that woman, only that she had once helped several children find safe homes. Ryland's hands began to tremble. He remembered his sister's name. Seraphine Mercer. The room remained silent as Ryland realized that the woman Ilara had described was his sister. Years of unanswered questions suddenly connected. The old charity. The missing records. The pendant. And Ilara. Ryland did not immediately claim that he knew the truth. Instead, he asked Ilara whether she still had any documents from the shelter. She nodded and said there was an old envelope at home. The bartender, Mavis Rowan, had been listening from behind the counter. She quietly admitted that she remembered Seraphine too. She had once worked with her during the shelter's earliest days. Now everyone understood that the torn jacket had revealed something far more important than anyone could have imagined. But the story wasn't finished. Dorian suddenly tried to leave with the folder. Ryland blocked the doorway. This time, he didn't threaten him. He simply told Mavis to call the authorities and asked everyone in the bar to remain calm. The folder contained evidence showing that several donations meant for the shelter had never reached the families who needed them. Ilara had unknowingly discovered the records while cleaning the storage area. Dorian had been connected to the old bookkeeping system. He had returned because he was afraid the documents would expose what had happened years earlier. When authorities arrived, the situation was finally brought under control. Ilara sat quietly at a table near the window. For the first time that day, she allowed herself to breathe. Ryland sat across from her, keeping a respectful distance. He told her about Seraphine. He explained that his sister had spent years helping vulnerable families and had always believed that people deserved another chance. Before they lost contact, Seraphine had told him that the greatest thing a person could leave behind wasn't money or property. It was evidence that they had made someone else's life better. Ilara listened with tears in her eyes. She had spent years wondering why she had been given that pendant. Now she finally understood. Seraphine had wanted her to remember that someone had believed in her. The next few weeks changed everything. The charity records were investigated. Missing funds were traced. The old shelter was reopened under a new community organization. Ilara was offered a position managing its meal program, but she initially hesitated because she wasn't sure she was capable. Ryland encouraged her to accept. Not because he wanted to rescue her. Because he had seen something she had forgotten about herself. Strength. Ilara eventually accepted the position. The copper lantern also changed. The customers who once ignored her began treating her differently. Some apologized for the way they had behaved. Others started volunteering at the new community center. Ryland became one of the regular volunteers. Every Saturday afternoon, instead of sitting in the corner of the bar, he helped unload food boxes, repair broken shelves, and deliver meals to families. One bright afternoon, Ilara found him painting a wall at the center. She smiled. He looked at the wall and joked that it was probably the worst painting job anyone had ever seen. Ilara laughed. It was a small moment, but it meant everything. She had entered the Copper Lantern believing she had to survive everything alone. She left that chapter of her life knowing that accepting help didn't make her weak. It made her human. Months later, the community center held a dedication ceremony for Seraphine Mercer. A simple plaque was placed near the entrance. It carried a message about compassion, courage, and second chances. Rylan stood beside Alara as the crowd gathered. He looked at the plaque for a long time. Then he realized something painful but beautiful. He had spent years believing he had lost his sister. But her kindness had continued living through the people she helped. And one of those people was standing beside him. Alara looked around the crowded room and saw families eating together, children laughing, volunteers carrying boxes, and elderly neighbors receiving meals. She understood that her life had not been defined by the difficult years behind her. It was being defined by what she chose to do next. The torn jacket from that afternoon was never thrown away. Alara kept it in a small box because it reminded her of the day everything changed. Not because of the argument. Not because someone accidentally tore the fabric. But because beneath all the confusion, people finally saw the truth. Sometimes life doesn't reveal our strength in beautiful moments. Sometimes it reveals it in moments when everything seems to be falling apart. And sometimes the person who looks toughest in the room is carrying the biggest regret. Rylan had walked into that bar believing he was simply protecting a waitress from trouble. Instead, he discovered a connection to the family he thought he had lost forever. Alara had walked into work expecting another difficult shift. Instead, she found the courage to uncover the truth about her past and build something meaningful from it. If this story touched your heart, please take a moment to like the video, share it with someone who believes people deserve second chances, and subscribe to Kindness Corner 2.0. Every interaction helps spread stories about compassion, courage, and hope. And before the ending, here's a special request. Comment, "Second chances matter," if you believe one act of kindness can change the direction of someone's life. The Copper Lantern eventually became more than a roadside bar. It became a place where people remembered that appearances could be misleading, that difficult pasts did not have to determine the future, and that kindness could survive even after people thought hope was gone. And whenever the afternoon sunlight streamed through the windows, Alara would sometimes touch the little lighthouse pendant beneath her collar. She would remember Seraphine. She would remember the frightened young woman she once was. And she would remember the lesson that changed everything. You never truly know what someone has survived just by looking at them. So be gentle. Be patient. And when someone needs a second chance, if you have the power to give it, don't turn away. Because sometimes the smallest act of kindness doesn't just change a person's day. It changes their entire story.